All right, welcome. If you've always thought JavaScript was just for, making buttons pop on a website, you are in for a treat. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on Node.js and take you from literally nothing to a real working web server. Let's get into it. Yeah, you heard that right. For the longest time, JavaScript was kind of stuck inside the web browser. But that begs a pretty huge question, right? What if you could use that same language you already know for all the cool front-end stuff to build the entire backend of an application? And that, my friends, is Node.js in a nutshell. It's not some brand new language you have to learn. It's not even a framework. It's an environment. It basically takes the super fast V8 JavaScript engine, the same one that powers Google Chrome, and yanks it out of the browser so you can run your JavaScript code absolutely anywhere. So here's our game plan. First, we'll cover the basics of how Node even works. Then, we're going to build our very first server. After that, we'll learn how to direct web traffic, see how frameworks make our lives way easier, and then finally, we'll talk about getting your app online and keeping it secure. Okay, first things first. Let's really dig into the tools Node.js hands you right from the get-go.
See, the really cool thing about Node is that it doesn't just throw you in the deep end. It comes with this amazing built-in toolbox. They're called core modules, and they handle all the nitty-gritty stuff you need to build a real application. And just look at the kind of power we're talking about here. You've got the HTTP module to build web servers, FS to read and write files on the computer, and even crypto for serious security functions. You can already see how these are the fundamental Lego bricks for pretty much anything you'd ever want to build.
All right, theory is great and all, but let's get our hands dirty. It is time to put those modules to work and spin up our very first super simple web server.
Now, building a server sounds really intimidating, but I promise it boils down to just 4 steps. First, you tell Node you need its HTTP tools with require. Then, you actually build the server with create server. Step 3, you tell it what to say when someone visits. Our classic hello world. And finally, you tell it which door to listen at for visitors, which is the port. Think of it like opening a shop at a specific address on the internet. And boom, with that one little command in your terminal, your JavaScript code is suddenly alive. It's not just a file anymore. It's a running server that you can actually go visit in your web browser. How cool is that?
Okay, so we've got a server. It can say one thing. That's great. But what happens when you want, more than one page? Like a home page, an about page, a contact page. This is where we need to start playing traffic cop.
And this is the big question, isn't it? A real website has to do different things depending on where the user is trying to go. A single hello world just isn't going to cut it for very long. This whole process is called routing. And honestly, the best way to think about it is that your server is like a restaurant host. When a guest, your user, walks in, the host checks the reservation, which is the URL, and guides them to the right table, which is the content they wanted to see.
And this shows us 2 ways to handle it. On the one hand, you have the messy way, just a long, ugly chain of if statements. It works, but imagine having 50 pages. Now, contrast that with the clean way. We just create a simple map that connects each URL directly to the code that should run. It's organized, it's scalable, and it's just so much easier on the eyes.
So building everything from scratch is an amazing way to learn. But sometimes you just want to go faster. And that's exactly why frameworks exist. Frameworks are basically bundles of pre-written code that solve all the common problems, like routing, so you don't have to constantly reinvent the wheel. And for Node.js, Express is without a doubt one of the most popular frameworks out there, and for very good reason.
I mean, just look at this. Remember those 4 steps we had to do with the basic HTTP module? Express boils all of that down to this one single beautiful line of code. It handles creating the server and all that stuff behind the scenes, so you can just focus on what really matters, your app's logic. So here's the bottom line. It's all about choosing the right tool for the job. The core HTTP module, it's fantastic for learning the ropes and for really, really simple stuff. But the moment you start building a real, full-blown application or an API, a framework like Express is going to save you an absolutely massive amount of time and headaches. Okay, building a server on your own computer is one thing, but getting it out there on the internet for the whole world to see and doing it securely, that's the final piece of our puzzle. See, when you put your app on a hosting service, you can't just pick a random port number anymore. The host tells your app which one to use. And this little line of code is the key. It basically tells your server, hey, listen on whatever port the hosting environment tells you to. But if you're just running on my laptop, go ahead and use 3000 as a default. It's super important.
And let me be perfectly clear about this. On the modern web, security is not a nice-to-have. It is non-negotiable. Running your server over plain old HTTP is fine when you're just messing around on your own machine. But for any real application that real people will use, you absolutely must use HTTPS to encrypt that connection. Setting up HTTPS can seem a little complicated, but it breaks down into a few main steps. First, you generate a private key. That's a secret file that never leaves your server. Then you create something called a certificate signing request, which is like an application you send to a trusted authority. They check you out, sign your certificate, and once you have that back, you just tell Node's HTTPS module to use your key and your new certificate. And just like that, you're secure. And once you're live, the next challenge is handling lots of traffic. This quote gets at a really powerful feature in Node. By default, your app only uses one of your server's CPU cores. But what if your server has 8? Well, the cluster module lets you run a copy of your app on every single core, which lets you handle way more users at once.
So there you have it. We've gone from a simple, almost confusing question, JavaScript on a server, all the way to a running, secure web application. You now have the fundamental building blocks to create powerful backends, APIs, and all sorts of services, all using the JavaScript you probably already know and love. So the only question left is, what are you going to build with it?